Knox College to use. So there was um, a course there on the Psalms. And so a number of Knox students, or soon to be Knox students, gathered there. I think it was, I don't know if it was July or August. And then school started in September. So it was great going into seminary, already having made a few connections with people. And Mark and I continued to be friends throughout seminary. He's much older than I, so he was ahead of me. Um, but it has been a really joyous relationship. And we continue to make a point of finding times to get together and meet with each other. And right now he's hosting a weekly or bi-weekly or monthly time for clergy to get together on Zoom and just talk about things that clergy talk about. So it's a wonderful friendship, and I'm very thankful for it, and very thankful that he agreed to be our opening speaker tonight. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Mark. He's going to present, and then we're going to have lots of opportunity for question and answer following Mark's presentation. Any questions from anyone before we get going?
We turn off our volume or audio or visual?
I think we're fine to keep the video on. If you want to if you want to go on mute, you can, but when Mark is finished, just unmute so that you can interact and ask your questions or make your comments.
What about the video?
Pardon me, Basil?
We can leave the video on?
Yep.
Okay.
That way I can keep a close eye on you.
Okay. Okay. I will keep on you too.
Thank you. Thank you.
Especially you, Joy.
Oh, I thought you were on my side.
Take it away, Mark.
Thank you. Thank you, Sean. And thank you for those kind words, especially way back, meeting in the Thousand Islands. I still have very good memories of that large, almost resort. It was actually a private cottage, but it was large. And it was Dr. Stanley Walters who did the presentation, and it was a good number of days. So there are three other things. Well, Sean's covered one, that Sean and I are good friends. There are a couple of other things that I would like you to know about me as I begin this talk this evening. The first is that I'm married to Kathy. I'm husband to Kathy, and I've been married 34 years, and I can tell you they have been the happiest 34 years of Kathy's life. I am also Gramps to Bennett and Georgia. I love my two wonderful grandchildren. Really, is there any other kind of grandchildren except wonderful? Bennett is 4, Georgia is 2, and in February, Kathy and I will become grandparents again. And lastly, as Sean's already mentioned, I've known your minister, Sean, since 1982, I think, is when we met that August, and then met each other again in September at Knox College. So I know many of you are muted. I want you to have your unmute ready, because and this is the only question I'll ask during the, I'm just wondering how often Sean has talked about me. You know, made references in sermon illustrations, perhaps the word mentor was used. Just shout out if he has, if it's weekly or monthly that he's mentioned me in sermons or meetings.
Is
Well,
that
that silence is telling me a little bit, and I'm a little hurt because I carried him through Knox College. But apparently it's all in the past, and we've moved on from that. It's a little after 7 p.m. here in southwestern Ontario. I believe the capital, the National Capital Region is in the same time zone. That's not always easy to tell. But by my reckoning, we're all in the evening, around a little bit after 7 p.m. And what I'm inviting us to do this evening is to consider that you and I are finishing up a pilgrimage. I'm saying that this pilgrimage that I'm going to unpack for you, for us this evening, began about 10 or 12 hours ago. And we still have somewhere between 3 or 4 hours ahead of us. So this is our daily pilgrimage. Each day, I'm suggesting to you, can be considered a pilgrimage. And it could be an analogy of our lifetime pilgrimage. There's a similarity between our daily journey and our life journey. For many of us this morning, especially those of you who are like me, remember Trudeau-mania, I mean the Pierre version, not the Justin version. For many of us this morning was like when we were really young. We woke up and we were ready to embrace the day. Physically, we were well rested, or at least rested. The aches and pains were minimal. Mentally, we were doing great. We hadn't lost our phone yet. We'd not misplaced our keys. We'd not forgotten why we came into a room. We'd not forgotten, and this is more recent, but I blame it a bit on COVID. I actually said at a meeting last week, I asked what month it was, not what day, what month it was. So that's how we felt this morning. We hadn't, aches and pains were minimal. We hadn't lost anything. Of course, we're still in bed, so that's part of the explanation. But that is how we felt. That's how we felt when we were younger, and that's how we felt this morning. By mid-morning, maybe around 10 a.m., that was kind of like when we're in our teens. Lots of time is still ahead of us. So we've made some plans, but they're short-term plans, and they're subject to change, because after all, we have the whole day ahead of us. Because we have the whole day, we can spare some time, we can get distracted. Maybe we go to Tim Hortons and we're there a little longer, that 15 minutes turns into 45, but that's okay. It's still mid-morning. We have still plenty of time ahead of us. Or we end up spending 15, 20 minutes on Instagram or Facebook, and suddenly an hour has gone by. That's okay. It's still the morning. We still have the whole day ahead of us. In the morning, we still also care about things. We're not cynical. We're not jaded. It's like we're in our teens. That's what my teens remind me of. I still thought the world, you could still accomplish anything. I still had a very rosy outlook on the world, as I do in most mornings. Noon, lunchtime, is a bit like our 20s or 30s. It's time to get serious. It's time to get something done. After all, we're not halfway through the day, but at least a third of the day is gone, and we still have stuff to do. And I'm looking at the age groups that's here. Some of us may be still working, but others of us, our work life is now behind us. But that doesn't mean we don't have important things to do. We still have to get to Costco, Sobeys, the hardware store. Dr. Phil is on at 2 p.m. and General Hospital is on at 3. So there's still things that are going to happen in the afternoon, and things still need to be accomplished. By mid-afternoon, I've always looked at my afternoon as what I was like in my middle ages. So that's 40 or 50. Again, that's still 10 years behind me. Maybe yours is a little more than that. Maybe it's where you are now. But mid-afternoon is when we start letting go of things. Some of the plans that we had for the day, we have to kind of revise them. Everything on our to-do list is not going to get done. But we're still ready. Well, we've accomplished some things and we're still ready to do a few more. But we're also kind of realistic about what is still left in the rest of the day, what we could still accomplish and what we have to settle for. So we might, if I can take this analogy back into our lifetime, in our 40s and 50s, we're looking at our job. It's not perfect, but we're not looking for a new job. So we settle. We look at our friends. They're not perfect, but we're really not looking for new friends. So we settle. We look at our church. It's not perfect, well, outside of the minister perhaps, but even that, we're prepared to settle. And then we look at our spouses. Oh, no, sorry. No, we're not going to look at that. My wife, Kathy, I will admit she settled. That's lucky for me. She could have done better. She's smarter than me and nicer than me. But after this many years, as I've said to her, well, why not just settle? And I'm grateful she has. We realize this is how we look. We're in our 40s or 50s. Now that we're here, we're not going to change a whole lot. We don't have the body of an Olympic athlete, but that's okay because we're not an Olympic athlete. And by middle age, we really have begun to appreciate our parents. And it's a blessing if they're still alive, but even if they're not, by the time we're at this stage, 40s or 50s, we really have begun to appreciate what they did for us. And if we're really blessed, our adult children have begun to appreciate us. It's dinner time. I look at dinner as, and Kathy and I are early dinner eaters. I realized as years have gone by, not everybody eats at 5, some are at 6 or later. But that is the beginning of what I call the senior part of the day. And if you're in the early part, you're a junior senior. If you're in the later part, you're a senior senior. And that's when you just start to embrace the day that you've had, or embrace the life that you've had. You're accepting, if we're blessed, we're accepting ourselves the way we are. We look back at the day with some regrets, but we're not obsessing over them. We recognize that the day is now past, and it doesn't do us any good to continually obsess over them. We're starting to see the advantages of aging. There's less hair to comb. The slip-ons used to just be slippers. But now we're looking for slip-ons that are dress shoes and running shoes and high heels. Our priorities are a little straighter. And if you've been able to, and I appreciate that I've gone back and forth, if you've followed me, you're seeing that there is a similarity between our daily journey and our life journey. And that's a recognition that there are stages to the day and there are stages to our life. And there are stages to faith. Pilgrimages are part of a faith journey. So I want to tell you about 2 pilgrimages that I look back at them now and call them pilgrimages. They're journeys that had some faith component to them, but certainly they were learning experiences, which is what a good pilgrimage is. The first pilgrimage or journey I want to talk about takes us all the way back to 1972. I am going to bike on a bicycle from Georgetown, where I'd grown up, was going to high school, from Georgetown, Ontario to Ottawa. It's about 500 kilometers, and I'm a teenage boy, 17 or 18, and I'm doing this with a group of other 7 or 8 other teenage boys. We are venturers. I'll come back to that, or I'll mention what that is. So in the Boy Scout movement, there's Beavers, Cubs, Scouts, and then the high school group, and it's not usually large groups, not like Beavers and Cubs, are high school students. And the core of us, the 7 or 8 of us that were in ventures, we had begun together as Cubs and Scouts. And we enjoyed our scouting so much that we stayed together through high school and became a venture group. Now we're talking about the early 70s. So as I remind my children, the telephone had been invented, but the internet wasn't available. So to do a bike ride of 500 miles took a lot of planning. You had to get out maps. You actually had to get books from the library about, you phoned tourist places to get them to send you pamphlets. There was nothing online. You had to do everything on the phone or via mail. So we did a lot of planning for this journey about where we were staying and where we were eating, and also what we would do when we got to Ottawa, the museums that we would look at. Of course, we would be going to Parliament Hill, and we'd be going to Scouts Canada headquarters. That was something we were all looking forward to. And the trip went very well. The places that we said we were going to stop at, the hostels we were going to stay, they were available. We had booked. The repairs on bicycles were very minimal, a few flat tires. It went really, really well. The planning paid off. What we hadn't planned on was the reaction of people, especially when we were stopped. We would usually cook our own breakfast wherever we were camping, but we generally stopped for lunch and dinner in a restaurant or diner. And that would mean that people who pulled into the parking lot would see 7 or 8 bicycles out in the parking lot, all laden down with knapsacks and saddlebags on the back and the front. Clearly, this was a group that was trying to going for some distance. It wasn't just out for a half an hour ride. And then they would come into the restaurant or diner and they would see 7, 8 teenage boys dressed well. We had agreed that we would, they weren't uniforms, but we would dress similarly so that people could see that we were a group together. And often they would come over and talk to us, ask us who we were and what we were doing. And once they found out what our journey was, they would engage with us about suggesting things to look at farther ahead. And as we got closer to Ottawa, they would have suggestions about what to do there. They would tell us about a restaurant that might be a couple hours away that we could stop for dinner. That was not what we had planned for. We didn't realize people would be that interested in the journey that we were on. And then more than once, not every day, but often enough that it wasn't rare that it happened, we would go to pay. And the bill had been taken care of. We never knew which one of the people that had engaged with us that day had bought lunch or dinner for 7 or 8 teenage boys. I enjoyed the journey. I remember some things about the destination. Of course, I remember Parliament Hill, but I actually don't remember the hostel we stayed at. I don't remember which museum I know we did. I just can't remember which museum, but I distinctly remember parts of the journey. And it was mostly because of the people that we had met. Some parts of the journey, we saw some interesting sights, but it was the kindness of people. It was the interest that people were showing in us, and fully aware that it would be very fleeting. We would never see them again, and they would never see us. I remember much about that journey. The next journey is 1978. So 6 years later, I've been 3 years at the University of Toronto. I'm considering going into ministry, but not been able to make up my mind. And decided to take a year off of university. I worked at the Abitibi paper mill in Georgetown. That was always my summer job from about grade 9 or 10. So I always went back to the mill in the summertime. This time I stayed on, said goodbye to all the summer students as they went back to high school and university. And I stayed on and worked through the fall and winter and spring. In April, I left on a 4-month trip to Europe on my own. And again, took a lot of planning, no internet. So again, it's the books, the maps, phoning tourism bureaus from different countries, asking them to send me maps and to send me brochures. Flew to England and stayed, and this was always in hostels, and then took the ferry over to France. A Eurail pass in one hand and a knapsack on my back, and I was on my own for the next couple of months. I had made some plans to meet my dad. He was going to be in Europe, coincidentally, that summer, so we met. I think it was Venice. And I met a friend later. Again, he was going to do some traveling, and we just coordinated how we would meet sometime. But June, I started this in April, and June found me in Greece, in Athens. And that's where I discovered how small, in comparison to Canada, Europe is. I had never considered going to Israel, because I was in Canada and Israel seemed so far away. But when you're in Greece, it's just over there. It's just right across the sea. And flights to Israel were cheap. So I flew from Athens. This was completely unplanned, but you could do kind of things like that in those days. I flew from Athens to Tel Aviv, to the Ben Gurion Airport. There's no time change. So I arrived around 1 p.m. There's a 4-hour time change, 4 hours flight. So I left at 1 and arrived at 5, but it was, there hadn't been a time change. I get from the Tel Aviv airport, I take a bus, an intercity bus from Tel Aviv to the Jerusalem bus terminal, and I get there around 6:30 or 7 o'clock. Now in June in Jerusalem, the sun sets around 8 p.m. The bus terminal is in the newer part of Jerusalem, across from the Crown Plaza. I'm not staying at the Crown Plaza. I'm staying at the Hebron Khan Hostel in the old city, the walled city of Jerusalem. So I need to take transit bus number 1 from the terminal, the bus terminal, to Damascus Gate, which is about a 12-minute drive, or 12-minute bus ride. I'm dealing with maps. I'm pretty confident that I know where I'm going. The hostel is just south of Damascus Gate. It's about an 8-minute walk from the bus stop. It's after 8 p.m. when I get off at the bus stop. It's not pitch black. There are street lights, but the sun has set. And the setting is different. I mean, there's this big wall. There's really old buildings. I'm in the ancient part of an ancient city, but I am confident that I know where I'm going. So I start walking toward what I think is the Damascus Gate. Now, in fairness to me, it was a gate. It just wasn't the Damascus Gate. And after 8 minutes of walking, I'm starting to have my doubts about where I am. But I don't ask. I mean, I'm a guy, so I'm not going to ask directions. After about 15 minutes, I'm beginning to have more doubts. I don't ask. In fairness to me, it's late. It's close to 9 p.m. It is a busy street, so I don't feel unsafe. But at 9 p.m., there's nothing open. So there really isn't anybody to ask. So I mentioned that it was an 8-minute walk, and you're now doing the calculation with me. You're saying, so you've been walking for half an hour. At what point did I realize I might be lost? That it was actually time to do something. It was time to ask someone. Well, just about at that moment where I would have said, and certainly you would have said, I'm lost, it's time to ask for directions, I realized where I was. Because right in front of me was the Jerusalem bus terminal. I had walked all the way back to where I had started. So, what to do next? Well, I walked into the bus station. I bought another bus ticket for route number 1 from the exact same person who had sold me the first bus ticket about an hour earlier. And occasionally I say to myself, how weird was it for that bus ticket seller to go home that night, to go home to family and say, you know, earlier in my shift, a Canadian backpacker, and they could tell we're Canadian, right? And they know we're backpackers because the flag is on there. How weird was it that he came in, he bought a ticket for route number 1, and then an hour later he came back in and bought another ticket for route number 1. On my second attempt, I got to the hostel. That hostel was my home for the next 3 amazing days. And the reason I call them amazing, not just because it's an ancient city, but it was there, and it wasn't one event. It was a series of events, small events, that cemented my calling to ministry. Some of it was at the Wailing Wall, some of it were the ancient churches, but it was the destination that changed, that helped me make decisions. The journey getting there, the walking the wrong direction for an hour, was not what I enjoyed, but I enjoyed the destination that time. I'm just going to take a drink. I don't know who said this. It's a quote I have here. At its heart, the journey of each life is a pilgrimage through unseen and unforeseen places that enlarge and enrich the soul. Throughout the history of the church, Christians have chosen to make sacred journeys and pilgrimages to holy places. This usually means physically moving from point A to point B. But what I'm suggesting tonight, and what I hope will be the discussion afterwards, what I'm suggesting tonight is that pilgrimages can also be an inner journey and experience. So whether we're taking an outward journey or an inward journey, we are pilgrims when we stay open to new experiences, or we take usual experiences and we see them in a new way. Now you might be asking, or want to ask me, well, Mark, those journeys that you were on, they weren't really pilgrimages, were they? You were being a tourist. You weren't a pilgrim. And you're right. There is a difference between a pilgrimage and a vacation. A pilgrimage, I would say, can be a vacation, and maybe it's one of the best ways to have a vacation. But really the difference between the two, I think, is about behavior. It is how we approach a vacation and how we approach a pilgrimage. You see, there's a difference between the way a pilgrim behaves and the way a tourist behaves. Ideally, a pilgrim has an awareness for God on the journey, whether it's our daily journey from waking up in bed and going to the same bed or to a bed that night. It's a yearning for God to speak to us on that journey, even if it's a one-day journey. It's a yearning for God to lead us, to direct us. It's the desire and the hope that God will disclose what God wants from us and what God wants for us. The pilgrim is looking for those signs. And so the pilgrim is patient. When the flight is delayed, the tourist says, I'm going to miss this, or I'm going to miss the connection. I've made plans. It's going to be ruined. We're going to be late. That is the way the tourist looks at the journey. When the flight is delayed, the pilgrim asks, what is God trying to teach me here? What is God trying to say to me? The pilgrim is looking for signs in the usual and in the unusual. In life, I think we can ask this question then. Are we pilgrims on our daily journey, on our weekly journey, on our faith journey, on our journey with our church? Are we pilgrims or are we tourists? Some people live their whole life like a tourist. But you and I, we're followers of Christ. So I believe we're called to live our lives like pilgrims. And this brings me back to the point I had at the beginning, that each day can be considered a pilgrimage. That we need to take a time to pay close attention, or at least some attention, to the meaning and the purpose of the day that we are beginning, the day that we're in the midst of, and the day that we have concluded. And then there's the next day and the day after that. Each day is a perfect time to ask questions about our faith journey and about our faith destination. When we do that, I believe we open ourselves to infinite possibilities, and we live in ways that lead us to God. And they lead us to that very best version of ourselves. That is God's hope for us. And it leads us home. So thank you for your attention this evening.